criminals offered a new identity and an entirely new life, courtesy of the government. A mobster sits in prison, certain to be killed by one of his own.
They wanted to post bail and get me out, and I knew if I was out, I was whacked.
Prosecutors offer a bargain, inform on the mob, get a new identity and a new life in return.
This is a program that sends murderers among us.
That guy who just moved onto your block may have a secret. For more than 30 years, the federal government has been relocating cooperative witnesses, some of them hitmen, drug kingpins, and mafia bosses. The Witness Protection Program has been hailed as an indispensable weapon against organized crime and denounced as proof that sometimes crime does pay. Join us for Witness Protection, Dealing with the Devil.
It's a beautiful afternoon in June 1962, but this man isn't enjoying the sunshine. Locked in a jail cell outside New York City, he's filling page after page with words like caporegime and consigliere. As FBI agents ply him with espresso and Italian delicacies, he's writing the first detailed account of the inner workings of the New York mob. His name is Joe Valachi, and he's fulfilling his part of an unprecedented bargain. Squealing on the mob will keep him from being strapped into the electric chair. Valachi's case begins a decades-long dilemma for the federal government: how to protect witnesses from the gangsters they testify against. Under J. Edgar Hoover's watch, the FBI largely ignores the mob. When Robert Kennedy is appointed Attorney General in 1961, he announces his intentions to cripple the underworld and smash its grip on American society. What he lacks are eyewitnesses, men willing to stand up in court and say what they saw, heard, and did. The problem lies with the oath of silence, or omerta, a gangster traditionally takes when he's initiated into the mafia. He has to burn a piece of paper while saying, "This is the way I will burn if I betray our secrets." It's brutally simple. You talk, you die.
You would never even dream of breaching the silence of this organization. In fact, to even mention that you were in it would end in death.
They were in the driver's seat. You couldn't put them in jail because you couldn't get anybody to testify because they were scared to death.
Joe Valachi's role in this war begins in early 1962. A soldier in the New York underworld, he's convicted of narcotics trafficking and is sentenced to a 20-year stretch at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. His new neighbors include dozens of convicted mobsters, including his own boss, Vito Genovese. Before Valachi gets too comfortable, Narcotics Bureau investigators drag him back to New York to squeeze him for information on mob operations.
Tell me.
Valachi holds fast to his vow of silence, but he becomes paranoid. He's convinced that Genovese has pegged him as a snitch and wants him dead.
At one stage, Vito Genovese said goodbye or embraced Joe Valachi, and Joe Valachi interpreted it as the kiss of death.
Valachi perceives every inmate as his potential executioner. He escapes attempts to knife him, then poison him. On June 22, 1962, Valachi steps into the exercise yard for a smoke. He spies 3 men lurking in the shadows. Valachi reaches for the only weapon at hand, a length of iron pipe. When a 4th man approaches from the side, Valachi rears back, swings, and crushes the man's skull. But it's the wrong man. He's killed an inmate with no ties to the mafia. Valachi now faces death in the electric chair. The only card Valachi has to play is his knowledge of the mob's operations. He decides to break his oath of omerta, become a rat, and tell the government what he knows. And he knows plenty.
You live by the gun and by the knife, and you die by the gun and by the knife.
On September 9, 1963, Valachi describes his life in the Mafia before a nationally televised Senate hearing. No gangster has ever done this before.
He told about the structure of organized crime. He told about induction ceremonies, the oaths that gangsters made to the crime family.
He picks your finger. Who? The Godfather. He picks your finger. He picks your finger with a needle.
The country was riveted. Bobby Kennedy called Joe Valachi's testimony the largest single intelligence breakthrough in the history of the federal government.
Valachi has squealed on the mob and lived. Since it's considered hearsay, Valachi's testimony is not used in criminal trials. But his Senate performance rallies public support for Bobby Kennedy's anti-mob crusade. Although he confesses to more than 30 murders, the government rewards Valachi's testimony with around-the-clock protection and a $15 a month allowance.
Valachi was told, you'll never get out of jail, but we'll keep you alive. And they put him in a safe federal jail facility that they end up calling the Valachi Suite. It was far from a suite.
Valachi spends his days alone in an 18 by 18 foot cell with barred windows and an open toilet. His only amenities are a television and a hot plate. Valachi's protection costs the government millions, and the prospect of life in a prison cell is not likely to loosen a gangster's tongue. But at this point, the government has no strategy for dealing with cooperative hoodlums.
If a cop wanted a guy hidden, he may take him and put him in a spare bedroom in his house or in his garage or in a motel out of town or something like that. But there was no formal provision to protect anybody.
These big-time people couldn't really exist.
Bobby Kennedy proposes building government safe houses, but that's dismissed as too expensive. Plans to ship witnesses to Europe are seen as coddling criminals. It is not until 1970 that lawmakers present a workable plan to protect informants. 38-year-old attorney Robert Blakey drafts legislation designed to outlaw racketeer-influenced corrupt organizations. Under the so-called RICO statute, being a member of the Mafia is now a federal crime.
And it was really the culmination of thinking about how to prosecute organized crime, focusing on organizations rather than individuals, which was the innovation.
One well-placed gangster willing to rat can bring down an entire crime family. The RICO law provides the Justice Department with funding for the relocation and protection of a witness for the federal government. The Witness Protection Program is born. But the law doesn't say where to put witnesses. Since jails and safe houses are too expensive, the government takes what may be the only option left: hiding the mob rats in neighborhoods across America. There they would be protected not by concrete walls, but the thinnest thing in a man's wallet: a new Social Security card.
There will be records created for him and for his family so that he can merge into a new community and not be found by those who would kill him.
Attorney General John Mitchell puts the U.S. Marshals in charge of administering the program. It seems like a logical choice. The Marshals' duties include guarding courtrooms and transporting prisoners. But this new assignment is to integrate the mob rats into society, not separate them from it.
You're not locking them up anymore. You're doing what you can to help them. And you got to take off the blue uniform. You can't treat them like criminals.
It's the summer of 1976 in New York City. The Witness Protection Program has been operating for 6 years. Former gangster Peter Diopoulos sits at a table in a donut shop. He's joined by 2 FBI agents. They want information. Diopoulos wants government protection. His deal with the government spotlights what some say are the program's moral flaws. Diabolos is part of a wave of gangsters rushing into the newly created Witness Protection Program. Originally expected to process 50 witnesses a year, by 1974 the Marshals employ 200 people to create new identities for more than 600 witnesses. The program is being swamped by its own success. With little training, few procedures, and meager resources, the Marshals have to improvise.
No one ever had a program like this.
If you have 5 guys, you have 5 programs. There was no rules, no regulations.
The Marshals botch some of the new identities. 4 members of one family receive Social Security cards with sequential numbers, an impossibility since each would have received a number at birth. There are also problems with the witnesses. A safecracker relocated to San Jose uses a government loan to set up a locksmith shop that fronts a burglary operation. The government admits that about 10% of witnesses end up being rearrested. But most, like Peter Diabolos, make a genuine effort to break with their former associates.
Got up, took off, and left. Don't look for me, I ain't looking for you, and don't come looking for me.
Peter Diabolos begins his life in the mob at age 13 when he meets a kid named Joey Gallo at a public school in Brooklyn in 1947. As teenagers, the two share similar after-school activities.
Joey was doing burglaries, I was doing burglaries at a young age, breaking into houses and so forth.
By the late 1950s, Joey has graduated to the Mafia big time by having a hand in the assassination of Brooklyn Don Albert Anastasia. He's a made man, running a crew with his brothers Larry and Albert.
Joey was a wise guy, tough guy, you know, and they say, what's a wise guy? If a guy comes back and answers you a wise guy, you got to kick him on his ass. Make sure, yeah, I'm the wise guy, not you. I'm the wise guy.
Diabolos, known simply as Pete the Greek, advances with Gallo, acting as his bodyguard.
We were bonded like, we respected one another.
But Gallo would spend most of the 1960s in Sing Sing, doing 9 years for extortion. When he is released in 1971, Gallo finds that his most lucrative rackets have been taken over by his superiors in the Colombo crime family. Tension between Gallo and the Colombos festers into violence. On April 6, 1972, Diabolos and his girlfriend join Gallo's birthday celebration at Umberto's Clam House in Little Italy, Colombo territory. With Gallo are his sister, his new wife, and his 14-year-old stepdaughter.
We sat down, we went to the far corner of the restaurant near the entrance door.
2 Colombo gunmen suddenly open fire. Diabolos is wounded, but he chases the shooters into the street.
And of course I had the pistol and I unloaded it and I hit the car a few times.
In the middle of the street, he finds Joey Gallo in a pool of blood, dying.
You know, this is very hard for me to come out and start getting this from my gut at this time. It's not easy to talk about at times because of the way it was done.
Diabolos tells the police nothing, but he doesn't like what Gallo's shooting says about the mob.
I mean, it broke every code that we ever stand for. And you killed Joey in front of a child and 3 women.
The police never charge anyone with Gallo's murder, but Diabolos serves a year for handgun possession. In jail, he's threatened by the Colombos, harassed by the warden, and abandoned by Joey's brother. When he gets out in August 1973, Diabolos learns Albert Gallo has a contract on him. He's had enough. His bond with the mob died with his pal Joey. He decides to break with organized crime.
It was a relief to a point where you take a big breath, deep in, and it's gone. It's out of my life.
He packs up his wife and kids and sets out to create his own protection program.
I had birth certificates, Social Security cards and whatnot that I had available for me. I knew what to do, how to be careful, and survive.
For 2 years, he and his family hide. until Diapolis gets a message. The FBI wants to talk to him.
Talk to me about what? What do I have in common with you guys?
The FBI has learned that Diapolis is writing a book about his mob experiences.
They want to get involved in reading what I'm putting together. And I said, you'll meet under my terms. And I want to inform you now that I'll be packing.
In his coffee shop meetings with the FBI, Diapolis sees an opportunity. He can get a new official identity plus financial support from the Witness Protection Program. In return, he agrees to give the FBI an advance peek at his manuscript. Period. No testimony, no naming names, no help building cases. 2 months later, Diapolis' memoir titled The Sixth Family is published. Anyone with $8.95 could now get the same information at a bookstore.
It's another example of the serious flaws in this program. Did the government gain? Did society gain? Did the victims of crime gain? The only one that gains anything is the bad guy.
In those days, there were no rules. So if the FBI wanted to read the transcripts before the book was released, and they made a call to Main Justice and sponsored him to a U.S. attorney, he got in.
On the taxpayer's dime, Diapolis sheds one skin and adopts another. He walks the street with a new, legally changed name. His fingerprint records are coded, so any new arrest won't compromise his identity. The statistical traces of his family's life, school, medical, military, even baptismal certificates, are recreated in their new name. His wife and children must learn to lie about who they are and where they've been. And they must learn the isolation of strangers in a strange land due to the restrictions the program imposes.
You can't call your mother, you can't call your cousins, your children lost all their friends.
Under his new name, Peter Diapolis Wise Guy learns to be a working stiff. He finds jobs as a short order cook, waiter, bartender. Even with a $1,080 a month subsidy from the Marshals, his income falls to a fraction of the $100,000 a year he was making as a gangster.
For 15, 20 years, not working, not doing anything, and all of a sudden you've got to go back to work. You've got to realize that this is what has to be done in order to survive.
But by 1978, sales of The Sixth Family generate enough income that he decides to drop out of the program. Diapolis gives up his monthly stipend, but gains his independence. This decision is not unusual. Most witnesses leave after a year or two, once they've come to believe they are relatively safe from harm. He takes his new identity with him and maintains access to the Marshals for any security or documentation problems. Living thousands of miles from the New York mob, his family is still camouflaged by the ordinary folks around them.
And he made a terrific transition. He's not the only one, but he's probably a shining example of what can happen if you just go along with the program.
Today, Diapolis won't talk about where or who he's been. But as a retired 68-year-old, he feels he's finally shed his old life, as well as his old enemies.
Either they're doing time or they're dead. That's the only way you'd be endangered if you go, back to your old roots. I don't go back to my old roots.
By the early 1980s, in communities across America, more than 3,000 people are under the U.S. Marshals' supervision in the Witness Protection Program. They're part of the government's increasingly successful battle against the mob. This man's morning routine includes making sure no one's put a bomb in his car. He has reason to fear. The year is 1983, and he's about to give testimony that will send dozens of mobsters to prison. His new name and whereabouts are kept secret, but the New York mob knows who he is. He's Dominic Montiglio, and they'd like to find out where he's hiding. Brooklyn, 1947. Montiglio was born into a family of Italian immigrants with strong mafia ties. As a child, he lives upstairs from his uncle, Nino Gaggi, a rising member of the Brooklyn mob. When Dominic's father leaves the family, Gaggi fills the void with his own needs clearly in mind.
Nino chased my father away and basically took me on as a surrogate son and kind of groomed me for that life, you know, being a wise guy.
Training in crime family values begins early. When Dominic is elected class president, Nino takes the opportunity to educate his 10-year-old nephew in the mafia's rule of silence.
And he says, well, what does the class president do? And I said, well, you know, when the teacher is out of the room, if someone is out of line, you write their name on the board for the teacher. And he told me, he said, well, then you're a stool pigeon. We can't have no stool pigeons in the family.
Dominic resigns from the class presidency the next morning. In 1965, Dominic joins the Army's Special Forces and is sent to Vietnam. It's partly an attempt to escape his Uncle Nino's domination.
When I went in, I was berated by my uncle. Well, his exact words were, you don't die for the government, you die for the family.
After 2 years, Dominic returns to the U.S. He and his pregnant wife, Denise, end up moving back into Uncle Nino's house. Nino is now a captain in the Gambino crime family. Slowly, Nino brings his nephew into the rackets. By 1976, Dominic is his uncle's point man, supervising the crews that do Nino's dirty work and carrying cash up the mafia chain to boss Paul Castellano. One of his responsibilities is a former butcher named Roy DeMeo. From a drab Brooklyn saloon, DeMeo runs Nino's most productive crew. Car theft, drugs, pornography, and loan sharking are his bread and butter. But DeMeo's specialty is cold-blooded murder. An apartment behind the bar serves as his execution chamber.
They had a deal called doing the Houdini. They just cut the bodies into pieces and bagged them in baggies and put them in cardboard boxes.
The boxes are picked up by a mob-run trucking company and disappear with the trash.
Roy had to answer to me as far as handing over money that I could kick up to Paul Castellano. And I was basically the eyes and ears for my uncle within the DeMeo crew.
Soon, Dominic develops his own drug and extortion rackets. He's making bags of money. But by 1979, he's addicted to alcohol and cocaine.
And the drugs got to me bad enough where I just didn't care anymore.
He's become an embarrassment to his uncle, and after he's accused of skimming money from his rackets, Nino disowns him.
Roy DeMeo figured he could make me do the Houdini, and Nino wouldn't care at that point.
Christmas Eve 1979 is not a happy time at the Montiglio home. In the dead of night, Dominic sneaks his wife and 3 kids past Nino's door.
I said, just pack up what we can pack and put it in the Mercedes, and we're out of here.
He picks a good time to skip town. In New York, federal prosecutors are building a racketeering case against Roy DeMeo and Nino Gaggi.
The case started off as an auto crime case. It basically evolved from there to becoming, more significant and more global in its conspiracy allegations.
Investigators are aware of Dominic's role within the Brooklyn mob, but his whereabouts are a mystery. Then, 2 years later, desperate for money, Dominic flies to New York to collect an old debt. He's arrested for extortion. It's a big break for the government's case. Dominic can connect DeMeo's murderous crew to Nino Gaggi and to Paul Castellano. Uncle Nino sends a lawyer to make Dominic's bail.
They wanted to post bail and get me out, and I knew if I was out, I was whacked.
Dominic is caught in a vice, squeezed between a probable 20-year jail sentence and a near-certain mob execution at the hands of his own uncle. On March 7, 1983, New York mobster Dominic Montiglio is walking on a razor's edge in a New York jail. He has 2 choices: do 20 years in federal prison or face the mob's wrath on the street.
I wasn't going to die for them for nothing, for their paranoia on what I knew. I went and got swept away and decided to become a cooperating witness.
Guarded by heavily armed law officers, Dominic, his wife Denise, and their 3 children are hustled to protective custody at a secluded campground in upstate New York. He's reassured by federal prosecutor Walter Mack.
He told me, don't worry about it. He says, our family's bigger than their family.
Dominic's own family and their protectors are crammed into 2 cabins. 7 days a week, Dominic is questioned by a team of investigators.
Who else do you know that got whacked? And how did it go down? And where did you hear it from? Were you there? Did you see it?
Well, I want to know what each of the 4... We'd read it back to him. Is this what you're telling us? So we have it perfectly clear.
Meanwhile, Denise cooks. For the first time in years, the Montiglios sit down to real family dinners with a few extra guests.
I think perhaps the best Italian cooking I've ever had in my life. The more we were together, the more we really grew to like each other.
I told my wife one time, these guys are the good guys. They really, really mean what they say.
After 3 months, the Montiglios prepare for the next phase of the Witness Protection Program, a transfer to the supervision of the U.S. Marshals. Dominic signs a contract binding him to the program's rules.
This is the way you have to conduct your life from here on in. And if you don't, then you can't be part of this program. But if you do, this is what we will do for you.
Under the Marshals' supervision, witnesses must be available for polygraph examinations at any time. All communication with relatives and friends must be relayed through secure Justice Department mail drops and phone lines. The transfer to the Marshals takes place in a hotel parking lot. If the investigators are the good cops, the Marshals become the bad cops.
Here we are all hugging and, kissing the kids.
We were all in tears, my family. And then the Marshals just put you in a car and they take you away.
The Marshals settle the family in Little Rock, Arkansas with their new identity. Dominic looks for his first legal job in years. It's not easy.
If you do want to say go out and get a job, and somebody asks you, well, where have you worked before? You have no references.
Even when he finds a job delivering Pepsi, life's a struggle.
With 3 children, my wife and me, it came to, I think, $1,450 a month.
On March 30th, 1985, Walter Mack's federal task force releases an explosive 78-count indictment against Dominic's uncle, Nino Gaggi, boss Paul Castellano, and 22 of their mob associates. Roy DeMeo's name is crossed out when his bullet-riddled body is found in the trunk of his car. But Dominic still confronts the reality of facing 2 powerful mobsters in the courtroom.
All you're thinking about is what it's going to be like to go face these guys in court. You don't sleep at night thinking about it.
As legal wrangling delays Dominic's testimony against his uncle Nino, he and his wife separate. Dominic is relocated alone to Birmingham, Alabama. Fear and guilt gnaw at his gut. One night in late 1985, his fear turns to paranoia.
I drank about half a gallon of scotch, and I had a M16 with 700 rounds. And I decided to call my Uncle Nino and told him to come down. This is where I am, and we'll just settle everything right there.
Nino doesn't show. The next morning, Dominic sobers up and gets himself transferred to a new city. After 2 years of anxiety, false starts, and legal maneuverings, Dominic Montiglio is finally called to testify in New York on December 4th, 1985.
The first eyes that I met were my uncles. They brought my 90-year-old grandmother in on crutches, and she was cursing under her breath at me, people going like this from the gallery while you're trying to testify.
That first day is only the beginning. In 2 separate trials spread over 3 years, Dominic's tale of murder and mayhem undergoes blistering cross-examination.
He withstood those pressures, he testified, and the jury believed him. I felt that he had honored his obligation to the government and to me.
Nino Gaggi, who nurtured Dominic to be a made man, not a rat, is convicted on a conspiracy charge. 6 weeks later, he suffers a heart attack in his jail cell and dies. Paul Castellano escapes the government's grasp when he's murdered on a Manhattan street. But dozens of other wise guys are sentenced to long stretches in federal prison. In December 1989, Dominic appears for his own sentencing. He confesses to murder, extortion, loan sharking, and drug trafficking.
We had prepared Dominic from day one to expect to serve 5 years in prison because he had been involved in serious crimes. Society says you have to pay.
The judge commends Dominic for his war record, for his assistance to the government, and sentences him to 5 years. Probation.
Everybody was hugging and, slapping each other on the back.
Tears were in his eyes, and he promised the judge that he had not made a mistake and he would never be sorry for what he did.
Under normal circumstances, Montiglio's crimes are enough to send him to jail for life. What does society get for its investment of trust in him?
I believe the New York City Police Department cleared over 120 homicides as a result of the investigation.
This crew could easily still be on the street, and there could be, by now, triple the number of people dead in Brooklyn or anywhere.
His years in witness protection have cost Dominic his marriage, his links to his family in Brooklyn, and his independence. Shortly after his sentencing, Dominic leaves witness protection and the marshal's supervision.
They dictate where you're going to live, how much money you're going to get, what the rules are. Eventually, I just said, I've had enough of it.
Today, Dominic lives alone in an undisclosed location far from New York City. His companions are a pit bull and a gun. He has regular contact with only 2 of his 4 children. As difficult as life has been under witness protection, it did give him the opportunity to remake his life. Maybe even a chance at redemption.
I have a recurring dream where I come out of Nino's house and him and Roy DeMeo are hiding under his car, and they look at me and they go, Dominic, come to hell with us. And I've had that dream 4 or 5 times over the last 10 years, 15 years. And maybe I won't have to go to hell with them. Yeah.
By the 1990s, prosecutors are having real success putting mobsters away, and the witness protection program is part of the reason. It's providing sanctuary for almost 5,000 witnesses.
It went from being the literal court of last resort to a chip the bad guys routinely use to weasel out of problems.
And gradually, the criminal justice system went from a system that used a variety of investigative techniques to one that increasingly relied on informers and snitches.
The strategy works. Prosecutors boast of an 88% conviction rate in cases involving protected witnesses. The result is simple. The government has made it much less attractive to be a mobster.
The promise of an organized crime family is membership means immunity from law enforcement. If membership means targeting by law enforcement, who wants to be a member? And the witness protection program is an essential piece in that whole program.
Some witnesses like Peter Diopoulos and Dominic Montiglio use the program as an opportunity to turn away from crime. Others don't want a fresh start, just fresh victims.
From over 150 interviews I've done with people in the program, I found one thing that's very consistent, and that is that people have a very difficult time getting out of that life. I identified 25 instances where people got out of the witness program and then committed murders under their new anonymous existences.
Case in point. In 1978, Marion Pruitt, a convicted bank robber, kills a fellow inmate in an Atlanta prison and accuses another prisoner of the crime. His false testimony convicts the innocent man and wins his own early release under witness protection. When the marshals settle him in a small New Mexico town, he returns to a life of crime. Local cops question Pruitt when his wife disappears.
Local police had suspicions about Pruitt before the crimes occurred. They ran computer checks, they checked with the federal government, they were told nothing.
By the time the marshals inform New Mexico police of Pruitt's true identity, he's already set off on a killing spree fueled by drugs and alcohol that leaves 5 people dead.
All the while, the government says nothing, keeps quiet, and allows Marion Albert Pruitt to go on his rampage.
Sometimes it seems prosecutors just can't pass up a chance to land a big fish at almost any cost. In New York, in March 1987, Gambino family crime boss John Gotti beats a second federal racketeering case.
We find him not guilty.
In late 1989, the government takes a third crack at Gotti. This time, he's indicted along with his underboss, Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano. Gravano believes his old friend Gotti is setting him up to take the fall. He decides his best defense is to join the offense. I want to switch governments, he tells the FBI.
He told them that John Gotti is the #1 gangster in the world and you guys are out to get him. And not only will I help you do that, but I'll help you bring down the Gambino crime family.
Prosecutors make a deal with Sammy the Bull. He is immediately placed under government protection.
I became a made member of the Gambino family in 1976.
Over the next 2 years, Gravano, the highest-ranking mobster ever to turn rat, testifies in Senate hearings plus 9 criminal trials. With his testimony, the government finally convicts John Gotti, as well as more than 40 other mob associates. In September 1994, Gravano appears for sentencing. Prosecutors reward his assistance with words of praise. Judge Leo Glasser declares, "There has never been a defendant of his stature in organized crime who has made the leap he has made from one social planet to another."
They didn't just put Gravano in the witness protection program. They wrapped him up in the American flag. They turned him into a hero. They had the federal judge saying that this act of courage is extraordinary. They had the prosecutors and FBI agents vouching for his character.
After confessing to 19 murders, Gravano was sentenced to 5 years, about 3 months per dead body. And he's allowed to pocket $8 million in assets from his life in the mob.
He was able to keep the money that he stole, the money he extorted, the money he actually committed murders in order to obtain. He was able to keep all of that.
Without those rewards for cooperation, we wouldn't have cooperation. And without cooperation, we would not have the success of the organized crime program.
But what about the safety of Gravano's new and unsuspecting neighbors? A psychological evaluation made as part of his sentencing is not reassuring. The likelihood of violent behavior is substantial. He continues to be violent despite his age. Nevertheless, he's given a new identity, a surgically altered face, and relocated to Arizona. The program's restrictions are too much for Gravano, and he drops out in 1995. But he's not one to fade into obscurity. A $250,000 advance on a memoir of his life in the mafia, coupled with proceeds from past criminal enterprises, are apparently not enough to support Gravano's lifestyle. On February 24, 2000, federal agents and Arizona state troopers raid Gravano's Phoenix business and arrest him on charges of distributing the drug ecstasy.
He didn't need the money, he had plenty of money. The only reason I could think that Sammy did it is some guys did not want to be John Smith. I think he wanted to be Sammy the Bull.
The Witness Protection Program has achieved its goal, piercing the mafia's code of silence and putting mobsters behind bars.
The Chicago outfit is down to about 3 crews. The families in major cities in Boston and Cleveland and New Orleans and Los Angeles had been virtually destroyed. So the presence of the Witness Protection Program suddenly meant that the wall of silence, omertad, that protected the mob, was now gone.
But some feel that the program's moral costs outweigh its benefits to law enforcement, and that the program needs a major overhaul.
There has to be some sort of moral center in the criminal justice system. Some people's crimes are so heinous, we will not make a deal with them. Because to make a deal with them cheapens and demeans and corrupts the entire justice system.
I'd pose this question. How many times can you commit murder before you're off limits to the federal government?
We can't afford to disarm prosecutors because they'll abuse the powers we give them, but we have to watch them, just like we have to supervise police officers. The Witness Protection Program is a trade with the devil. It's an old Irish saying. If you would sup with the devil, you should have a long spoon.
The Witness Protection Program has proven so effective that it's now being used against terrorists and drug traffickers. And when it comes to high-profile terrorism cases, the government occasionally offers far more than mere protection. The star witness in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing case was Ahmad Salam, who had infiltrated a group of terrorists and took the stand during their sensational trial. For his efforts, the FBI paid Salam more than $1 million. To discover more about this and other topics, please visit our search engine at historychannel.com.